Good morning and welcome into a Thursday edition of Mic'd Up here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, Pittsburgh Sports Now, and Steelers Now for this show all throughout the Now family of networks. Mic'd Up is, of course, presented by Martin Lawn Services. You can hit up Doug Martin for all your lawn care needs. They even help you put together a patio. I've seen that done actually by a friend and colleague. Doug Martin's numbers 412-849-5894. And on this show, we're going to go wall-to-wall Steelers, like wall-to-wall Steelers has been the conversation the past 24 hours or so, with the NFL schedule officially being released. So it took a while to learn when the Penguins playoff game would begin, but before we knew that information, we knew when the Steelers were going to play 4 months from now, and that has been the talk of the town, to say the very, very least. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and I am going to be joined by a Mike with his middle name being Michael, as Cale Berger here of the network will fill in for Mike Vukovcan. Cale, of course, Cale Michael Berger. So it really works out, actually. Both of my fill-in co-hosts have had middle names of Michael.
It kind of worked out perfectly. Glad to be here, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that we're worked out. So it's still mic'd up in a sense here. And Cale, as we get started, the Steelers' schedule's known. The NFL schedules have been announced as they kind of matriculated throughout yesterday. And we had all that covered, of course, over there at SteelersNow.com. We got the big games, but now we have the official schedule over there on the site. The Steelers will not open the season against the Cleveland Browns as some speculated or maybe kind of wanted to occur, and certainly has occurred many years of the past when the Browns weren't relevant. They would always open up with Cleveland, even last year being the case. But this year they're going to open up on the road at Buffalo, 1 p.m. CBS, so KDK locally. So that's going to still kind of be a revenge game for the Steelers. You see a tough road the rest of the way, again, to say the least. They are a division champion, so you knew that was going to be the case. First game at home at Heinz Field against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Bengals might even be improved. You're seeing stacked games with Baltimore. You're seeing the Chargers, a lot of primetime games again for the Steelers. So not going to be an easy road. They also will play Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, assuming Aaron Rodgers will still be on the Green Bay Packers at that point. Just your thoughts here. We're going to get into some big games, some potential upsets, and kind of the schedule overall here in a moment. But just your overall thoughts when you saw this schedule, now that you see the full picture being painted for the Steelers, knowing this roster, knowing most likely the team that's going to be playing in those games, knowing last year. And we knew it was going to be a tough schedule, but now we see it in front of you, and you see a lot of those tough games in a row to make the Steelers potentially vulnerable there midseason.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, we all expected this to be a difficult schedule, and that's what happens when you're a division champion.
Right.
And, but like you said, it holds different weight when you look at it, when you have it in front of you. When the Steelers tweet out there, these are our 2021 opponents back in January.
Right.
Okay, great. But it looks a little different when you got dates next to them, times and prime time or not. So we expected it to be a difficult schedule, a challenging schedule to say the least. And I think that's exactly what the Steelers have. When I look at it, I wasn't sure if they were going to have more or less primetime games. And I think there's also some ways you can look at this schedule and maybe infer how the league views the Steelers.
Right.
What if they think the Steelers will be a team that, not necessarily starting 11-0 like they did a season ago, but a team that has genuine Super Bowl aspirations, and they're not just talking about that on the South Side facility, that people elsewhere around the league see the Steelers in that group as well. So I think you can infer all those kind of things from this schedule. Like we said, it is challenging to say the least. But I think if you ask the players on this team and Mike Tomlin, they're going to say that's exactly what they want. They want to play the best. That's the competitive drive in them. And,
right.
Probably it may not make the record look as pretty as it did last year in the regular season, but still a challenging schedule, but also a very entertaining schedule for the fans out there. A lot to salivate over for the next couple months.
And entertainment is kind of what I want, honestly. That's what we're looking for here, covering the team and talking about the team. So entertaining is a positive for the Steelers, for people watching. Fans may not love it because it might be entertaining in a negative way, but it will be entertaining no matter what. Steelers, Buffalo, Vegas, Bengals, Packers, Broncos, Seahawks. They get a bye this year, and I'm assuming I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this is going to be a legit bye where they're going to be off, and everyone's going to know that going into the week.
They're hoping.
Maybe I'll be wrong, as we were wrong last year if you would have thought that to be the case. But again, looks to be around a week 7 bye here for the Steelers. They then would get the Browns, Bears, Detroit, Chargers, Bengals, Ravens, Vikings, Titans, Chiefs, Browns, and Ravens. And at the end of the year, it's certainly not easy. And generally speaking, teams have the schedule not be this brutal in those last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And who knows if you're going to be resting starters, if opponents are going to be resting starters. Of course, last year the Steelers were resting starters in that final game against Cleveland. The Browns won. They played the Steelers in the playoffs, and we know what happened there with the embarrassing loss. But that's kind of where I first jumped to in terms of difficulty, in terms of when I see this schedule, that we knew the teams they were going to face. We knew the division the AFC North was going to face and the NFC North. But when you see it stacked like this at the end of the year, they're not going to start 11-0. I will go out on a limb, Cale, and say that I'm going to make that prediction now, early prediction. They will not start
Pretty
the season
smart.
11-0. Yeah. I'm assuming
Pretty
you're going to be
safe.
with me on that. But if they don't start the year with some respectable sense of a schedule, they're going to really have a tough time trying to come back and crawl into the playoffs with this schedule, unless some of these teams are resting starters, which you can't guarantee.
Yeah, you mentioned that late December, early January window. And, the NFL did the Steelers, they didn't give them any gifts this holiday season, when it's getting to late December, early January, because, not only these very challenging matchups for them, but, this is in the thick of the playoff hunt, and the Steelers are potentially in the best division in football. I mean, that's what I think a lot of people are considering the AFC North coming into this season, especially in the AFC.
Sure.
And, they're going to be in the thick of a playoff hunt, or that's at least where they hope to be at this point in the season. And they're going to have 4 games against teams that they're going to be jockeying with at that very moment for a potential playoff spot or potential playoff seeding, depending on what situation they are. I mean, Tennessee at Kansas City, and then obviously the 2 division teams to close out the year. Not only is it difficult in terms of X's and O's and the overall matchups, but it's also adding some extra juice to those games, because that's exactly who they're going to be going up head-to-head against in terms of jockeying for position if they're trying to make a playoff appearance once again for the second year in a row.
Right. Yeah, Tennessee, the Chiefs are going to be figuring they're going to be jockeying for seeding. The Ravens, Browns for the division situation. Minnesota, not so much, but that's certainly no gimme of a game. And that's the only game that kind of breaks up this potential playoff situation at the end of the year. And you really could go point to, from week 11 on, it's going to be about the playoffs, and they can't afford to lose any of those games in terms of seeding. That's really going to be the situation from the Chargers game on, and that Chargers game is primetime on Sunday Night Football. So it's not going to be easy. A lot of these teams have young quarterbacks, as they kind of are already in the middle of round 2 of their rebuilding process with a young quarterback, maybe even further along. The Steelers, another year with Ben Roethlisberger, his 18th season. So it also will be important for him to hold up, because, as you know, you were on a couple post-game shows with me last year. This is also around the time where Ben kind of decreased. He got older, kind of showed signs of his age.
Mm-hmm.
Elite players, Hall of Famers, they can do it for a while, but they can't sustain it as long, generally speaking. I'm not saying he's going to be bad, but it's hard to rely on somebody at his age to be your MVP. You're going to have to do it as an overall team, and you're going to need to be healthy, and he's certainly going to need to be better. But it's concerning the toughest games are at the end of the year, because you would figure that no matter how good or bad he's going to be worse at this point based on just his age and how things go.
You're right. It's a very good point. That is when we saw the dip in his play last season. I think the other thing to factor in, too, is that was the point of last season in the final year under Randy Fichtner leading the offense. That
Sure.
They started to figure things out, or opponents started to figure them out and know what they were necessarily trying to do offensively. I don't know if it was always Marlon Humphrey overhearing the play calls from Ben Roethlisberger.
Right.
They got a little predictable, and I think they would even admit that.
Well, there'll be some fans there this year, so right.
Well, yeah, exactly. So probably won't have that situation. But now you have Matt Canada taking over. He's going to do some different things, and that might catch some teams off guard or by surprise early in the season.
Right.
But when you're getting to a week 12 and beyond, that's when people have a pretty good idea of who you are. So you would hope that they're not as predictable as were a season ago. You couple that with what could be a potential another drop-off by Ben Roethlisberger. You would hope that a less predictable, more productive offense, a more balanced offense too, would negate any potential drop-off from Ben at that point of the season.
You would hope if you're a Steeler fan, but that's definitely concerning. You would rather have the tougher games earlier in the year or middle of the year than at the end of the year. And that's pretty much always the case, but certainly when you have an aging quarterback and a new system.
I think the other thing that jumped out at me when I first saw this schedule is the quarterback play the Steelers are going to have to face. And that being from, the best of the best to even guys that are just above average, but still – you look at one of the criticisms of their 11-0 start last year. One of those was some of the quarterback play that they faced, whether it was the Garrett Gilberts, and we talked about this, we saw on a post-game show. Was the Garrett Gilberts, the Jeff Driscolls in that Denver game early in the year? I mean, they were playing Ryan Finley, who actually ended up beating them on a Monday night game.
Yeah, Dak Prescott was hurt
in Cincinnati. Yes, so that was one of the criticisms that it was fool's gold, that 11-0 start, was that they didn't really face a ton of great quarterback talent. It was a ton of backups and middling guys in there. And I don't think you really see that with this schedule. Now, obviously things can change. Guys get hurt. There's plenty of variables and stuff that can happen from now until August or whenever this, the season gets rolling. But still, you don't see a lot of easy breaks in terms of the quarterback play like they had last year. And even to take that a step further, I mean, you look at the quarterbacks they have to face that are some of the elite best quarterbacks in the league. I mean, right off the bat, week one, it's Josh Allen, an MVP candidate from last year, who was absolutely sensational, and he was sensational against the Steelers. You have Aaron Rodgers in week 4 if he's on the team, or you could have Aaron Rodgers week 5 if he's playing for the Broncos.
Right, that's very, very true, because I was going to point out that the Bronco game is probably the game against, you could quote unquote, the weakest quarterback on this entire schedule, unless you flip-flop it and then put Aaron Rodgers over there. And then regardless, actually, from the Packer, Broncos to Seahawks, so even if Aaron Rodgers is on the Broncos, for 3 straight weeks, they're facing 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks barring an injury, whether it be Rodgers or Russell Wilson.
You go Russell Wilson. In week 6, and then later on in the season, week 11, Herbert, and week 16, Patrick Mahomes. So you're facing the best of the best. Herbert's probably the odd man out right there, but everyone's expecting him to have a stellar sophomore season. And that's the thing with Aaron Rodgers. He could be in Denver. He could be in Green Bay one of those 2 weeks. So not a lot of reprieve at the quarterback position for the Steelers. I think the ones that really stand out as winnable games in terms of the quarterbacks they're going to be facing is Chicago and Detroit, both games at home. Detroit, obviously, Jared Goff, who they traded and acquired from the Rams. In Chicago, you're either going to have Andy Dalton or Justin Fields, a rookie. A rookie I know we're both very high on.
Sure.
We talked about that on our draft show a few weeks ago, but still a rookie nonetheless.
Yeah, Steelers feast on rookies, especially with a pass rush like that, you would imagine.
Exactly. And the other thing you got to factor in, too, is there's questions in the secondary. They have Joe Hayden on one side, Cam Sutton's on the other, but there's still questions around this secondary.
Right.
And these guys are the type of quarterbacks who will pick you apart if you're not sound in those areas. So that's one of the other things that really jumped out to me from the start, is the type of quarterback play that they're going to face this year.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point here. Cale Michael Berger, Mike Asti here on Mic'd Up on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Again, thanks to Martin Lawn Services, our title sponsor of the show. And again, Steelers Now is where all this coverage can be found. As this a Steelers wall-to-wall program, as the Steelers schedule has been the conversation around Pittsburgh sports. Even with playoffs coming up and the Pirates, they are playing games, if anyone is not aware. But it's certainly a conversation right now about the Steelers schedule being unveiled, and the NFL having just the foresight to have the TV schedule done so much in advance that somehow other leagues can't get done. Outside of just the opponents, the quarterback play, some question marks about who's going to be quarterbacks, but still looking at elite quarterbacks you're facing. I mean, honestly, even Carr with the Raiders, I don't think is anything to sneeze at. He's been very underrated in the past 4 or 5 years. We're looking at multiple 4,000-yard seasons.
And that's the thing, is you have some guys that are just above average, still good quarterbacks. You have a Derek Carr. Later on in the season, I don't know if he'll necessarily play week 3, but I think we all expect big things from Joe Burrow this season, coming back off that torn ACL.
Right,
you have Lamar Jackson, you have Baker Mayfield, and you have Kirk Cousins as well. For as much, that is not a primetime game. Never mind, it is a primetime game.
That's a primetime game, Thursday Night Football.
Pencil that in as a victory for the Steelers if they're facing Kirk Cousins on a Thursday night primetime game. But still, there's like 3 games. I look at this and I think, there's a clear edge at quarterback in that game. Some of the other ones I feel like are toss-ups, and then others, it's clearly you're facing another future Hall of Famer that is in a much better position in their career than Ben Roethlisberger currently is.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely going to be the oldest quarterback in any of these games. So he will have that to his credit going into any of these games, really no matter who you end up starting and who you end up facing. Now, looking at this schedule as well here, is there a game or two here that maybe the Steelers wouldn't be expected to win, that you think maybe they could swing, or very important for them to do so? In terms of important games, I guess I'll ask it that way. What would you say is 1 or 2 games here on this schedule that are the most important games of the year? And then we'll get into if they can upset teams or if they're vulnerable to be upset. Because it's a Steeler team that's going to be good, but certainly I wouldn't imagine the best team in the league.
Yeah, I look at the one game that I look at, first of all, that maybe – it's kind of a toss-up, but I think an important game nonetheless. And the Steelers, I think, definitely are – it's going to be a pressing game for them to win.
Right.
It's, I think, December 19th against Tennessee. You get them at home. You beat them last year in Nashville, but you get the Titans at home. And this is what we talked about off the top. You're going to be in the thick of a playoff hunt, probably jockeying for position with Tennessee at that very moment.
Right.
You got Kansas City the next week, where I think, if you are a logical person – you look at the makeup of the Steelers, you're going to Arrowhead in late December.
The Chiefs are really good then. They rev up the engines at that point.
Well, the Chiefs are very good then.
Yeah.
It's going to be a packed house at that point.
You would imagine, yes.
You have Patrick Mahomes, obviously. They have a retooled and refurbished offensive line that should allow them to do whatever they want, similar to when they went on their Super Bowl run in 2019.
Right.
And the Steelers, the way we talked about with Ben Roethlisberger, what is his play going to look like in late December? I don't think that's a win for the Steelers, is basically what I'm trying to say on the day after Christmas.
Sure.
So I think that adds extra motivation and added incentive on December 19th. You have to ensure you get a win that day, because next week it's probably going to be a tall task to get one at Arrowhead against the Chiefs. As for a potential upset, I'm looking at just a few weeks earlier, this one, the weekend of Thanksgiving, and that is at Cincinnati. The Steelers obviously lost at Cincinnati last year on Monday Night Football. This one, just a normal Sunday early afternoon game. But, I talked about Joe Burrow and how he might not be the guy back there as the starter in week 3 when they host Cincinnati at Heinz Field. But we expect him to be fully healthy and in the swing of things and back to his normal self come week 12 there when they host the Steelers. And I think the other thing we talked about, the secondary questions with the Steelers, they have one of the best receiving cores in the entire AFC in, newly drafted Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins. Those are 3 weapons that I'm not sure the Steelers right now, as currently constructed, can match up with in the passing game. And if you get Joe Burrow back there, he has a few games under his belt. He's feeling comfortable once again. He's got that retooled offensive line. I mean, we'll see how that holds up against T.J. Watt and Highsmith and Quincy Roche. But I think that's a game for the Steelers that's a classic Mike Tomlin trap game, but also just one where, they might just see a team at the worst possible time and a team that perfectly matches up with what their question marks are as we sit here in May.
I think it also makes sense because you're going to figure that the Raven games, you're going to figure splitting. That's just, you go into every year figuring splitting with the Ravens. Maybe you're now figuring a split against the Browns. You're not going to say that the NFC games, while they're going to be entertaining, and certainly the Steelers could lose some of them, they're hardly as important as the AFC games because of playoff seeding. So Green Bay, your Bears, Minnesota, those games. And early in the year, because I could also point to the Raider game. I would not be shocked if they lose that Raider game, regardless of what happens in week 1. I think, again, Derek Carr is underrated. I think that Raider team is better than people think. I think they were better than people thought last year. It's very weird to have a league with the Raiders. Al Davis is rolling around in his grave somewhere because the Raiders are constantly overlooked and very rarely discussed on talk shows across the country and nationally when they weren't horrendous last year. They certainly were competitive.
They
John
were,
Gruden was vying for Coach of the Year for a while if it wasn't for the mask fiasco, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, they were 1 quarter away. They were 1 quarter of Fitz magic away from probably being in the playoffs.
Right.
But Ryan Fitzpatrick struck there at Allegiant Stadium. Yeah, I like that Raiders game as a possible upset as well. And the guy that I'm pointing to in that game would be the tight end Darren Waller. 109 catches, 1,100 yards, and 9 TDs last year.
Right.
You know, we saw Devin Bush when he was healthy at the beginning of last season just get absolutely cooked by the Broncos' Noah Fant. And Devin Bush is supposed to be the Steelers' cover guy there at linebacker. His speed.
He's going to be a key this year, his return, yep.
Yeah, and he's coming off that knee injury. He's supposed to be their cover guy on some of these explosive receiving tight ends. He wasn't able to do it pre-injury last year against Noah Fant. You hope that he has improved and is going to come back better than ever. But, you know, Darren Waller's a completely different animal. So I would point to that as maybe a matchup in a potential upset there for the Steelers that could cause some problems because, you know, Devin Bush is going to be the guy. And then if it's not Devin Bush, who else on the roster is going to cover Darren Waller? I'm not very confident the Steelers will be able to do that. So that could be one of the reasons why that could be an upset.
And that might be a worse loss to have because you're coming off the Buffalo game. And then, yes, you have the Bengals right after that. But then it's Green Bay, Broncos, Seattle, and those games getting stacked before the bye. And then the schedule really, again, there's no nights off. There's no days off. There's no cupcakes on this schedule really.
No.
Again, the Bengals are probably the weakest team, them and the Bears maybe. But the Bears were flirting with the playoffs for a while last year, even though they have a new quarterback system right now. And the Bengals have Joe Burrow, who was hurt last year. So they have some hope there as well.
If I was going to play devil's advocate with Chicago, I know that there's uncertainty at quarterback and on the offensive side, but they still have an excellent defense. You know, they have Khalil Mack. They have Eddie Jackson back there.
I almost went that as an upset. Yeah, that could be.
Yeah, they have a ball-hawking safety back there, Raquan Smith, the linebacker. I mean, this is a talented Bears defense, and they rush the passer well with Khalil Mack there, and that's something that as we look at the Steelers' offensive line that's been rebuilt and patchworked together here over the draft and through free agency, it's going to be Chuks Okorafor and Zach Banner on the other side of the tackle spots. I mean, if those guys are still in those positions on the starting offensive line by that week of the season, I mean, they're going to have their hands full with Khalil Mack. So that could be, you know, their defense. It could be one that gives the Steelers problems.
Yeah. Absolutely. Again, the quote-unquote weakest opponents could easily beat the Steelers, and I don't think anyone would be surprised.
It's the NFL.
Any given Sunday, yep.
Exactly. So every team, you know, you're not playing any team that's going to be absolutely horrible and doesn't do one thing well that could give you issues.
Right. Yeah, and again, all of these teams would be beating Alabama. These are pro players. This is a collection of the best of college, even on the bad team.
Except for Detroit. I'm going to pencil that in as a victory. So 1-0 on November 14th against Detroit at Heinz Field.
I feel like Detroit doesn't have much for me to be concerned about that game as well. Yes, I think Detroit, the Steelers are at least going to get a couple of these wins. But again, I feel like it's pretty for sure they're not going to open up a year 11-0 and have that cushion where they're able to lose 5 out of their last 6 or something like that and still have a solid situation. And remind everybody, they are division champs. So I get what happened in the playoffs. Nobody's trying to screw the Steelers. The NFL's not running a conspiracy. They're playing a division championship schedule. And yes, the Ravens and Browns are going to face the same teams in terms of the AFC North versus the NFC North, but it might not be stacked like this, but this is how it should be. They won a division. So it's rare when you win a division and you putter into the season and you crawl into the next year where you're concerned off of the playoffs, but that's the case for the Steelers. Cale Michael Berger, Mike Asti here on Mic'd Up. And Cale, as we kind of close things up, couple questions here. Number one, when and will this be a situation for the Steelers? Will they be able to start resting players? Will we see the varsity in these last 2 games of the season? Or will we see the junior varsity for the Steelers going again to that Browns game and then closing it up with the Ravens? And then also here for the Steelers, is there any early season, way early 4 months ahead of time record prediction that you want to provide?
Yeah, you know, as I look at the schedule right now, with the idea of resting players or doing what they did last year against Cleveland in the season finale, I don't see that as a possibility. And this goes back to that discussion of
Yeah.
that 4-game stretch to end the year. All division opponents, or 2 division opponents, all conference opponents, playoff teams that you're going to be jockeying for position with. I don't think they're in a position where they're going to be able to, rest people.
Unless the Chiefs are resting players.
Yeah, but I don't even think that in week 16 you're going to be resting players.
Right.
That's a little too early, I think, and I don't
Right.
necessarily think the Chiefs are going to rack up a bunch of wins at that point to the point where they walk in there, 15-0.
Yeah, and if they do that, then
is?
you
Or
want to finish the job.
They'd be 14-0. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think there's a very high likelihood of that happening, and also,
Right.
there's different philosophies on how this thing works out. So
Sure.
But no, I don't think they're going to be in a situation because I don't think they're going to be stacking up wins the way they did this past season. They're going to be in a position to do that. That being said, as I give a record prediction here, and I have to remember that there are 17 games now.
Yeah, it is hard. Yes, 17. I hate odd numbers too. I'm too OCD for this 17. There's 17 games, 7 teams in the playoffs. I need even numbers in my life.
I agree. I agree. I had a record in my head, and then I said, "Oh, we got to add a game to that." If I had to go way too early, record prediction here for the Steelers.
Way early.
I'm going to go 9-8 for the
Okay.
Pittsburgh Steelers in 2021.
Okay, and that's probably not a playoff appearance. I mean, maybe a wild card because you are looking at 7 teams. Yeah, maybe
also,
a second wild card.
I think it also kind of depends on the AFC North. And if they're all beating up on each other like that, if everyone has a 3-3 division record or something in the division, that could make some things interesting. But I'm going to go 9-8, and I think they're right on that cusp of making the postseason. I probably have to lean towards not making the playoffs this season with just the way this thing's all laid out and the state of the team.
It's going to be rough. Yeah, it's going to be rough. It will a lot depend on Ben's health. And if he can be good enough Ben, doesn't have to be great Ben, but good enough Ben through most of the year. If Devin Bush can get back to healthy and do his thing, if they can get enough from the secondary, if the receivers can play like they're supposed to be playing in terms of their names and their publicity and how good they've been in the past, and if there can be some semblance of a running game, which should also be a positive that wasn't there last year, that we talked ad nauseum and everyone has talked about Najee Harris being the draft pick, whether or not that was a good pick or not. Either way, whether you like it or not, he's going to help the running game. The running game will be better. So that will be big for the end of the season for this year because you want to have a running game when everyone's dog-tired and hurt at that point, and the weather's not as good either. I'm going to go, I think, one step worse than that. I think I'm going to go 7-10 as a prediction for the Steelers record, and then that would solidify them missing the playoffs. And I don't think anything's going to be insane where Ben's going to have the wheels fall off and all of a sudden throw 30 picks. But I just think they're going to have too tough of a schedule in front of them. They're just going to be mostly an average team. They're going to win some of these games. They're always prone to lose some they otherwise should win. If they do that at all next year, I don't see how they can overcome it because the schedule's so hard. And I don't see a possibility going from the Chargers, Bengals, Ravens, Vikings, Titans, Chiefs, Browns, Ravens. I don't see winning more than 2 or 3 of those games at the end of the season, and I feel like they're going to be in a situation at that point they're going to need to win probably at least 4 or 5 to get a chance at the playoffs because you're probably losing 2 or 3, if not more, prior to that with the Bills, the Raiders, the Packers, the Seahawks in the mix. And some of those teams they may beat, but some other teams they're not going to. And again, I can stamp myself down. This team is not going 11-0. There's not going to be a cushion this year.
Yeah, for me, it comes back to that 4-game stretch to end the year. And I have them going 2-2 in that stretch. I have them, winning a game that's kind of a toss-up with the Titans, losing to Kansas City, beating the Browns at home, splitting the season series with the Browns, each team taking their respective home game, and then falling to Baltimore at the end of the season. So I had them going 2-2 in that stretch. But, to cancel out that Tennessee win, you got to factor in a game that they probably should win and end up dropping. And that's the Week 12 matchup at Cincinnati. So that's where I come down with the 9-8 record prediction in May. But I think that's how it shakes out the last 4 games. I think they'll win one of those. They'll win 2 of those games, maybe one that they probably shouldn't have won. And I'm going to go with the two home games because they will have the terrible towels waving. They'll be back at Heinz Field for those games after a year without fans. But I have the Cincinnati game being the Tomlin loss, and I have the Tennessee one there at the end, one that they overachieved.
I do think they're going to lose one of these to the Bengals this year. I do think they're going to lose one of those to the Bengals this year, whether it's Joe Burrow showing out or just they're going to lose the Bengals somehow. I think that's going to definitely occur. The Chargers are always a team they usually beat, but I'm more concerned this year than any other year. And I also do wonder, depending on how the season goes, that's one of the primetime games out of the 5 that could be flexed out. So if they're sucking prior to that, I could see that being flexed out.
That's a good point. And I think the other thing, too, you got to factor in with the Chargers is, these Pittsburgh, then San Diego, now LA games have always been kind of a laughingstock or a joke because you look at the stands and it's like Steelers.
I don't know why they're always primetime. Yeah, they're never good games.
You look at the stands and it's like Pittsburgh Southwest because you have all these Steelers fans that make the trip. Even Duck Hodges was able to knock off this team because there were terrible towels galore in the stands there when they were still playing at the LA Galaxy's stadium, the StubHub Stadium or StubHub Center or whatever it was called. Now they're in SoFi Stadium. This is going to be the Steelers' first opportunity to play there. They're officially opening it this season after they didn't have fans last year. I'm interested to see if, this brand spanking new arena, this beautiful architectural marvel, if Steelers fans take it over once again like they've taken over Qualcomm and StubHub Stadium in the past. I'm interested to see if that happens because I think we all realize that there aren't a ton of Chargers fans in LA. I mean, they're not there because there was a fan base dying for the Chargers to move. They're there because of money.
Yeah, we could go into a whole nother show on that because the city wanted the Raiders, then they wanted the Rams. The Chargers were an afterthought. They're the Clippers situation basically there. And them having a star quarterback and potentially being good because they flirted with being good last year certainly could help things. But the Rams have been to a recent Super Bowl, and there's still a Rams franchise that's beloved there. There's probably more Raiders fans in LA than Charger fans, even though the Raiders play in Vegas, for crying out loud. And LA is a transient location where you're going to have a lot of people, including my uncle and many others, who moved that are Steeler fans. So I think it's about the area more than the stadium, and I think you're still going to have a lot of Steeler fans there. Whether that'll be as much of a factor against Herbert as it was a couple years ago will remain to be seen. The 2019 win did not include Herbert being the quarterback as he just is coming off a rookie season in which he threw for 4,000-plus passing yards.
And it didn't include Ben Roethlisberger either.
Right. It did not. It included a washed-up Phillip Rivers at that point who was a year away from being done with his career against Duck Hodges, as strange as that game was. Yeah, I had to get that refresh in my memory when I was looking for images. Like, yeah, that was Phillip Rivers wincing, and there's Duck over there laughing. What a weird game that was. That'll do it for this morning's show. Cale, I definitely appreciate you jumping on and filling in for Mike, and it works out with your middle name, so that allows us to be mic'd up a little bit about the Steelers' schedule. We will continue the coverage of Steelers Now. We'll both be there with more on this schedule as that will be the conversation. Eventually that will go away with rookie mini camp coming up and training camp to follow, and actually us able to talk about things that matter, hopefully not any drama, but things that actually matter on the field with these games that now we know what they are. So we knew it was going to be tough. We know it was going to be a rough road, but now we know what it is, and we know where they're stacked in there. So for Cale Berger, for all of us at Pittsburgh Sports Live and throughout the Now family of networks, that's it for this morning's edition here, our Thursday edition, almost at the weekend, guys, of Mic'd Up in the Morning. Mike V will be back with me here coming up. That's the Steelers' schedule. Like it or not, that's what it is. And good luck to them. We'll see what happens, and it's not going to be easy, to say the very, very least.